Well, hello and welcome to our very final YGD Masterclass of 2021. I know I'm feeling emotional as well, but don't worry, we are going out with a bang today because we are diving into the world of storytelling in game design. I'm your usual host, Elle Osili-Wood, and I've got some partners to thank before we kick things off tonight. As you know, we cannot do any of this without them. So a huge thank you to our fantastic lineup of partners who are Creative Assembly, Criterion, King, PlayStation, Tencent Games, Ubisoft, Warner Brothers Games, and Wizards of the Coast. Speaking of which, that's where one of our guests this evening is from. So Jeremy, I'm going to come straight to you to kick things off. Introduce yourself. Tell us everything we need to know.
I'm Jeremy Crawford. I am the principal rules designer of Dungeons and Dragons at Wizards of the Coast.
Fantastic. So excited to have you here. We've got such a range of expertise tonight. Dion, tell me everything I need to know about you.
Hi, I'm Dion Lay. I'm a principal writer at Creative Assembly. I'm working on an unannounced project at the moment. And in the past, I've worked on Halo Wars 2, Alien Isolation, and several of the Total War games.
Fantastic. We've had our first unannounced secret of the night. It's always the way. We've always got somebody secretive. So you've kicked us off there. And lastly, Cara, tell us about you.
Hello, I'm currently a narrative director on unannounced projects and just in the kind of transition period between jobs as well. But in the past, I've worked on things like Dreams for PS4, Dishonored 2, and Where the Water Tastes Like Wine. So lots of little projects and big projects in the past, but really excited to be here.
Oh, so great to have you here. As I said, we've got such a mix of experience, kind of projects that you've worked on previously, job titles. So this should be really interesting. Cara, I'm going to come straight to you to start off with. Tell us a little bit more about what your job looks like and perhaps what a day or a week looks like in your world.
Well, I started off as mainly just a writer, so obviously you can get into writing craft and how to write various different things. I went to university to study English literature, which is obviously a help, but you don't need to be academic to know anything about writing. You can just write one day. You can just start writing, and I think, for me at least, it was really good because I started off doing lots of writing for games journalism. So I actually got to know games that way first and started kind of honing my kind of critical faculties and thinking about design and thinking about the ways that games work and like why we like them and things like that. And then I started experimenting with kind of interactive fiction of my own during that time. And then that way I kind of got into writing things for games full time. And then now what I do is more narrative design. So I think there are two facets to my job. And the first is the craft of writing, but the second is more a design oriented thing where you use the tools of the game to actually change the way the structure of the game works, change the way that narrative is delivered, change the way that characters interact with each other. So that's kind of mostly my day now is I get in there. I download all the tools, download the game builds, and then I kind of look at ways that characters interact with each other and like how they kind of relate to each other that way.
That's really interesting. I love that you said just start. I do think that's a really helpful thing actually to lots of people who I think storytelling feels like a dream role. I think it's one of those roles, isn't it, that for lots of people it seems like the dream. And I think saying to everybody, you can just start is actually a really simple but helpful piece of advice.
I think so, because for me, it was all like, I felt like I needed permission from someone, cooler or more accomplished than me. And actually, I think the best thing to do is just download a free tool like Twine or something small that you can make interactive fiction with and just start. And then as soon as you can like finish something and show it to someone, that's like this major achievement. And then people start to want to employ you because you've made something of your own. So yeah, I really recommend just kind of getting started, getting stuck in.
Dion, tell me a little bit about what your day-to-day looks like in your role.
Generally, it kind of divides into two things. There'll be just content creation, which will be story, dialogue, environmental storytelling, kind of character bio, stuff like that. that's kind of creating the content. And then on the other side of it is kind of lots of collaboration with the other disciplines of the team to make sure they know what the story is, solve any problems they have with the story, and just kind of champion the story a bit, and kind of, you know, make sure that there's a consistency and that we don't lose track of it. And the other main thing that takes up my time is I go to a lot of recording sessions. So when we're doing dialogue, I'll be there to answer any questions and also do any rewrites if a line isn't working or something suddenly occurs to you, because the actors usually bring a lot to it and you go, oh, actually now the actor's doing this, I'm gonna fold that in. That's a good average over all the projects, I think, of my week and day to day.
Jeremy, I assume is quite similar for you because you work on so many different types of projects. So tell me what your, I guess, month to month looks like.
Yes. So I've been at Wizards of the Coast working on D&D for about 15 years now. And in that time, as you rightly guessed, my day-to-day has varied widely. There are some days where we're trying to nail what the story is going to be and what in one of our upcoming products. Other times when we're getting into the nitty-gritty of how our rules function and how our rules can serve our storytelling, because in our game, the tabletop game, all of the writing that we do includes both the storytelling and the rules. Members of our staff need to be able to not only craft compelling game narrative, but also work on system. And be able to weave both of those types of writing into the same book, which is quite a wonderful challenge. It's one of the reasons why I love this work so much, that we get to do both simultaneously. But because we're doing both, the week, you know, one meeting we are drilling into what does this new type of elf need to be able to do, and the next meeting are the story beats of this adventure, you know, compelling. The next day it's all about, is this book laying out well, and we're working with our art directors and our graphic designers. The next day we're digging into thousands of playtest feedback and drilling into what really was compelling for them in this adventure that's coming up, what story beats really landed for them, which ones didn't, which game mechanics are confusing, which ones are unbalanced. So we are going all over the spectrum constantly. And again, that's part of what makes the work so exciting.
Jeremy, I'm going to stay with you. Let's talk a little bit about the process of storytelling. So what does your process look like from the point at which you've identified what you want to do, and then the journey to that final place of, you know, being happy with what you've put together?
So focusing specifically on story, we are almost always first wanting to clearly identify whom our audience is. You know, whom are we telling this story to? And that seems like such a simple thing, but it's amazing how often game designers and storytellers forget to ask that critical question up front. Whom are we talking to? Now, often the answer is, well, everybody. We want everyone to love the story, and that's fine. But even just pausing to remind ourselves that we're trying to reach everybody is critical, because to me, as any kind of entertainer, whether we're a game designer, a novelist, a comic book writer, a filmmaker, you've got to remember your audience, and remember everything that you're about to do is about moving them, making them laugh, maybe occasionally, you know, evoking tears, creating scary moments. It's about them. And then we really try to drill down. Once we have figured that out, we drill into what is the heart of this story that we are presenting, which is an interesting question to ask in interactive storytelling, because of course, when you are writing a novel or writing a screenplay or a teleplay, you're creating a linear storytelling experience. In classic game storytelling, the story is not linear, because if it's a game, that implies the players are actually going to make a choice at some point. And of course, there are some video games that are more linear. They're very basically visual novels, but at least the type of interactive storytelling that we do is filled with choice. And so what that means is we have to then marry our notion of what is the heart of the story to how many interesting choices can we provide, and is there a way to make that web of choices still deliver the heart of the story without having a set linear through line? And that is a really fun challenge of that work. And then also our process, since our storytelling also involves game design, we then have to make sure that any new rules that appear with the story help also actually nudge the play experience toward the heart of the product, that still speak to the themes, the main story beats, the characters, the NPCs that we really want people to interact with. Everything needs to at least be distantly related to that sort of central force of gravity for the product. The other thing, and I'll wrap up this answer here, that is the other thing that is key to this whole process, is knowing from the beginning things are going to change. There's often this sort of romanticized notion that, you know, the brilliant creatives came up with a plan and then executed for 9 months. Well, we came up with a plan, then spend all that time discovering the ways our plan has to change. And so also, along with all of the other work we do, it's critical for us to have nimbleness and to change course when we realize our story has a dead end we didn't predict. We're going to have to rescope the project, and so on.
Dion, for you, does that sound similar to you? Is this kind of what your process looks like when you're working on a video game?
Yeah, it's funny. Like, listen, Jeremy, I was like, yes, all those things. We kind of, so we have a very similar thing where we'll have the directors will go, okay, this is our new project. We'll have pillars, and the pillars will be like, you know, what is our audience? What's the tone of the game? What kind of game it is? You know, how big is it? All these kind of things. And that is, I mean, it's the very start of it, and it's usually when you're not doing much writing, it's all kind of figuring stuff out and researching, but it's really vital. And those kind of pillars, you constantly check against throughout the development of the game. Like, are we still doing those? Have we gone off somewhere wrong? Is one of the pillars wrong now? Does that, you know, has that caused problems, or is it not as important as we thought it was? And you know, one of the things is the really important thing starting off is the tone of the game as well. You know, is it funny? Is it serious? Is it mysterious? Is there an IP that's got a really distinct tone? Are you supposed to stick to that? Usually you'll stick to the tone of the IP, but the people that own it may go, oh, actually, can you do something different for us? And that's really key, because sometimes it's not always, it may not be to your personal taste. For example, you may go, oh, I'm not really into that thing, or I don't know much about it. And so the next part is kind of research and immersing yourself in it. If it's an IP, I'll read all the books, all the comics, play the games, watch the movies. If it's not an IP, then I'll find things that are similar. And that's a really important process, because it's good to have references. So you'll go through and go, hey guys, this film, this could be really useful to us. This film is kind of in the same genre, but it's not right. And so you start narrowing down a kind of, it's almost like a mood board of references, and you kind of figure out what you want to tell. And then from then it's kind of just iteration and development. You're kind of, on the one hand, you're kind of polishing the stuff you've got that's working. On the other hand, and then you're kind of, but you're also in the background kind of trying out new ideas, seeing what else fits, solving problems when, you know, there's a big thing you want to do and there's no way we can do it. And then one of the things I usually do is I start making a narrative Bible, which it's basically my go-to. So whenever someone asks me something, you know, there's a lot of information, so I'll forget and I'll just go to this narrative Bible and go, oh, yes, I said this here, let's do this. That's almost like my own personal pillars that I can check against and go, am I on track, you know, within my discipline? And that's also, I just love doing that. So I just love having a narrative Bible because I kind of love lore and I geek out over it.
Oh, the narrative Bible sounds like a dream. I mean, for anyone who loves to geek out, that really does sound absolutely incredible. I feel like I want to sneak peek inside it now. I bet it's amazing. I'm sure it's secret. Another unannounced project, I'm sure. Cara, for you, tell us a little bit about your process. Do you also have a narrative Bible?
Yeah, I mean, narrative Bibles are always super useful just because, you do need something to present to the rest of the team where you go, this is the thing that holds everything together, like you say. I also have some experience, not just working on like giant established IPs, but like really, really small games as well, like independent games. And they have a slightly different process where you actually need to get a prototype going, first of all, to prove out the genre of game it is and like what those bare bone kind of mechanics are. And that's an interesting process for a narrative designer, because really what you're doing there is you have to listen to your team and what they expect the fun parts of the game to be. And then you have to go away and think, so how does that like produce a story, and how can I enhance that prototype with some story on top of it? And so there's a lot of interesting stuff that goes on very early in indie game development that might not have to go on when you've got an established IP. It's actually a bigger kind of conversation with the rest of the team. What are you all interested in? What do you think we should be saying with these mechanics? And then obviously there's trying to get buy-in for your ideas as well. So you go away, you have a little think about what the constraints are, and then you work up something that you think is presentable to your team. And those are often, like the others say, like that, those are often like the themes or pillars of the game that you want to touch on. And then if everyone's excited about those, and I think the excitement in your team's like super useful, because if everyone's excited about your idea and everyone thinks that sounds great, then it's really easy to kind of keep going in those like, long game dev winters where everything's going wrong and there's too many bugs and you have to rewrite like, 50 characters. But generally speaking, if everyone's excited to see the end result, then it's much easier as a game dev process to kind of get there. I think it's kind of an interesting thing thinking about what you can't do as well, because often that limit is put in place, by how many characters you can animate, for example, and how long that takes, because animation takes a really long time. So that's often a part of the limitations of telling a story in a game.
So I'm interested in what good storytelling means to you. Dion, I'll start off with you. What does that look like to you?
No, it's funny because there's I think with storytelling, it obviously has a lot of with video games, has a lot of similarities to just kind of writing a novel or something like that. But I think the main difference is the players, because they're going to take control of the game, and they want to play the game and have a say in the story and be part of the action. You can do it in different ways. You can kind of like, you can give them lots of choices. So you can do something like Fallout, which has like a big open world that's really interesting and has lots of little stories inside of it, but the player can almost make that entire story themselves. Or you can kind of just you can leave gaps. You can kind of like BioShock, for example, leaves. It's quite linear, but it a lot of the stories in the environment itself, and so they leave kind of space, negative space almost, that the player can kind of get their own story. Like cutscenes are so useful for telling a story and everything, but you kind of want to you usually want to skip through them. So it's always keeping the player as much as you can, keeping the player in the action, make them feel like they're kind of part of the story and they're kind of making choices. The other way you can do this is stuff like Obra-Dinn, kind of like mysteries. So the actual reveal of the story is part of the gameplay itself. I mean, that's what I think mainly in video games, that's it. It's kind of leaving the space for the player to do their own, not only play the game, but make their own story themselves.
Cara, for you, what does good storytelling look like for you?
So for me, I always want to see something unusual and unique, obviously, but I think the main way that you get people to think that your game has a good story is actually by, like Dion said, giving the player a maximum amount of control. But what I also really think is important is that let them actually tell the story via a set of verbs that you're actually using. So essentially storytelling by doing is really important in games. Let's use Obra Dinn as an example. Your main mechanic is firstly exploration, and second of all, filling out your little journal full of insurance type details. And basically, that actually does make you feel, first of all, like you're an investigator. And secondly, it also makes you feel like, since you have this little, journal, it does make you feel a lot like an insurance investigator. And the investigation part of that is done really, really well because it makes you role play as an investigator. So I think for me, a really great story fulfills this kind of verb selection where you're using those verbs to literally tell the story of the game. But also you really want to reward the player for their choices. So for me, what I want to do is notice that the player has made a particular choice and then write for those cases. So I think whenever a game notices that you've done something and the game responds and reacts to that, that's when I feel like I'm involved in the story personally. And that's what I try to do with most of my stories, is notice that the player has made a choice and then also let them know that particular choices are available to them, because it's always delightful when you're like, oh, I didn't know I could do that kind of thing as well.
Jeremy, for you, I'm interested in what good storytelling looks like for you, particularly in the tabletop space.
So to me, what's fascinating is it's very similar to what makes a great story in a video game, because also in a tabletop role-playing game, it's all about inviting the player to act. Those verbs, that the story needs to be an endless invitation, an invitation to the player to make a choice, to feel something, to think about something, to try to solve something, whether it's a mystery or a puzzle. And then what really resonated with me, Cara, is this idea that then once we've invited them to do something, the game needs to respond, because that again is what gives them this illusion, that this powerful, magical illusion that they're really in this world and they are making meaningful choices. In D&D, our core game design, we divide into 3 pillars. We talk about the game has combat, exploration, and social interaction. And in our game specifically, the trap we can fall into is think, oh, the storytelling happens in social interaction, because that's when people are talking. But often the story beats people will remember most are actually what occur in the other 2 pillars. They'll remember that thrilling moment in battle and what it said about their character and their character's place in the world, or they'll remember that puzzle they solved, or that beautiful, mysterious valley they discovered while exploring. And that for them is as much of the story as the exciting dialogue they had with a particular NPC. So again, I think it's really important to give choices, respond to those choices, and remember that the story is going on even when no one in the game is talking.
If somebody wants to do what you do, and, again, our audience watching are kind of 10 to 18, so at that very first stage where they've perhaps made their first game or they're just working on their first projects, what should they be doing to follow in your footsteps?
For me, I just played around with interactive tools and wrote a lot. And, slowly those 2 skills converge where, one is more of a design skill where you understand what it's like to structure, let's say, pinch points, because I know everyone's interested in how you might look at an open world situation and writing stories for that. So if you imagine you're writing branches and branches and branches and branches and branches of stuff, and then all of a sudden you go through one little pinch point where you gather everything up again, and then you can go off again, and then you can refer back to choices that were made previously using like little flags, and then by the end everyone will have had a different experience of your story, but they all got those critical path pinch points all the way through. And so you can learn that in interactive fiction. The hardest part of my job is actually writing for actors, because that just means I talk to myself all day long in my office and start acting out my own scripts. And does this sound natural to say? Is this easy for an actor to say? Would it be better if they said nothing here instead of lots of words? Like all of that kind of thing is really important to kind of hone your craft. And so I would definitely recommend things like a screenwriting course, short ones. Some community centers even put those on. There's lots of classes you can take for writing, but the most important thing about writing is let people whose writing you admire read your work and try and get some feedback on it, because normally you only improve if you fail, and there will be some things that you fail at, and some of that will be writing and some of it will be design. And the best idea is to just keep doing it even though it's incredibly painful, because when you start out you aren't good at them, and that's okay. Just keep going.
Jeremy, that's something you touched on actually, is just how much player feedback and user feedback is a part of what you do. So would that be part of your advice for anybody who wants to do what you do?
Absolutely. I think it's important, even when you're just doing something for yourself, to start building your muscles as a designer. Find those people to give you frank feedback. Sometimes it can sting a bit, especially early on. I can tell you, you'll get used to it in time. You eventually you'll develop the ability to I see you shaking your head. No, I mean, honestly, it can still sting, but you'll get used to it, and you'll be able to remember in the past how often your work has improved because of that great feedback.
Dion, for you, if somebody wants to do what you do, what's crucial? What should they be doing now?
So there's a book that's really good called what's it called? The 5-Minute Writer. Yeah, 5-Minute Writer, and the Creative Writing Course Book. What these are they're like little prompts and exercises. It kind of explains like different aspects of writing, but then also gives you a really practical, have you only got 10 minutes today? Well, here's a 10-minute writing challenge. And so those little things, they're really good just to keep you going when you're having a bad day, or sometimes you want to write something, but you've got to come up with the idea first, so they'll kind of like get you over that blank page thing. And then like some practical things I do. I mean, I don't even do this if I'm having trouble writing something. I usually do this all the time, where actually now when I write, I don't try and keep it polished. I can write really super rough notes, and I will just write at the top. I'll write what I want to say, So I might be like, oh, I want to write something about a relationship. And then I'll write out little notes, little ideas, and it'll look terrible. It'll look really scruffy, really rough, but then I'll just leave it and I'll go, that's fine. And then a couple of days later, I'll come back, and this is more about being critical of yourself. And it's so easy after a couple of days to look at your work and go, oh, I know what's wrong with that now. Whatever you're stuck on, once you have a couple of days, it's like all the problems jump out at you. But also the good stuff, and you go, oh, actually, that's what I should hone in on. So there are a couple of like kind of overall practical examples I think are really useful for writing. And then super practical is kind of try and do like a little document that's like a whole game in itself. So write maybe a paragraph of the world the game is going to be set in, 1 page of a story, like really basic outline. Maybe the lead character and a bad guy and a supporting character. And then maybe a little screenplay. Maybe screenplay's really useful, format's really useful to learn. Like maybe a 2-page cutscene with dialogue. And then you have a kind of little bundle of like a mini game almost. And that's really nice to have, because you'll find out what you can do and what you can't do, what you need to improve. But it's also a good backup for a CV, even though most games companies will usually tell you exactly what they want and they'll ask for a test. But it's still nice to go, I've got something else I can work on that I can talk about. And you can say you've had a bit of experience in these things.
All right, we're going to move on to Q&A. We've had some really good questions come in. We had an anonymous question who wanted to know, what tools or software do you use in your day-to-day? So Jeremy, I'll start off with you.
Since we're normally writing for books, we draft things in Microsoft Word, flowing in a lot of notes from OneNote typically, and then we migrate into Adobe InDesign, where we turn our words into a book and lay everything out with the art.
Yeah, I kind of use Word. I use, Excel, PowerPoint, all the kind of normal stuff. Sometimes I write in Final Draft for screenplays. There's a good bit of software that I haven't actually used for a year, but I used a lot on Halo Wars 2 called Scrivener, which is kind of like a like all-in-one kind of. Oh, it's great. You just kind of got everything you need. It's kind of like you can do the screenplay in it, but then you can like add your little notes, and it's very well organized.
So we had a question from Noah, which I thought was interesting. When you're creating a story for a more open game, do you create the story in a linear fashion, or do you create little bubbles that you then join together? So does anybody want to jump in on that one?
I mean, I think it's a bit of both, because you're normally telling this, you have to think about which character the player is going to play, or if you're going to be able to choose between lots of different characters, because then, you know, you have to look at the budget very quickly and go, you know, how many strands of, you know, how many cinematics could we afford, that kind of thing. You know, if you're doing, say you could choose between 5 characters, you might have to, you know, write 5 different ways of negotiating the same stuff, so that has increased the budget 5-fold. But if it's just a, you know, one player character, then you're usually centering the story around that one character and that character's experience of your world. But you can also approach it from like the kind of lore Bible sort of way as well, where you're thinking about what kind of world are we exploring and what's the most interesting way you can negotiate that world, which is probably more the Dungeons and Dragons way. And so you're thinking about, well, if I dropped in this type of person into this world, what's the most interesting experience they could possibly have? But yeah, it's easy to do the pinch point method as well. With open world, you think about what's the critical moments that they have to experience, and where are the optional things that would just enhance their experience. So it's a bit of a kind of back and forth between the two, I think, for me. But yeah, I think that's my view on it.
So also from Noah, very keen Noah, I like it. I feel we'll keep an eye out for you. Noah said, basically, can you ever write too much story for a project, or is it better to just keep adding details?
I think you can only write too much if it pushes something else out and it compromises something that's really important. Because you can write an infinite amount as long as you don't cause any other problems, but it just doesn't have to go in the game. But it's really useful. So when I was talking about the narrative Bible earlier, there's stuff that won't go in the game, but in my head I'm like, oh yeah, but this character has this bit of history, and so it helps you kind of really solidify the world. So when you tell people, when you break it down into bullet points or shorter pages, it's really focused, because you've done all that work that they don't need to do, and you've kind of sifted through all the, you know, sometimes it might be rubbish, but you've gone through it. So I don't think you can ever write too much, as long as it doesn't, you don't, you know, let it compromise the stuff you really need.
I definitely write too much, but it's more on the dialogue side. There's sometimes there's like walk and talks, you know, in games where you're going from A to B. And if you write too much, then obviously they finish by the time they've got to B, and there's no more time for your nice dialogue. So a lot of it is just play testing as well with dialogue and figuring out, you know, they don't want you wittering on and on and on anyway. So, but yeah, I think Dion's right that, you know, especially for developers as well, you want to write something short and sweet, because they don't have time to read your giant lore Bible. Unfortunately, a lot of the time they just need to know, okay, is this character angry or sad? You know, so that kind of thing.
Yeah, I was just going to say, to me, that's the critical distinction, is that I think we all write a ton, but what we write isn't necessarily what the player is going to see in the finished game. And so what I think the three of us are implying is you have to be okay with cutting. So on one hand, yes, right, come up with all those rich details that will inspire your own storytelling. But then when it comes time to actually make the finished version that the player is going to experience, get out your knife, because you're going to cut.
Definitely.
And my advice is, do as much of the cutting yourself as possible, because if you don't, someone else will. Whether that's your editor or a lead designer, someone else, if you don't cut, they're going to come in after you and start cutting, because every game has practical limits, whether it's the playtime and budget of a video game, or even in our game, D&D, where once you're at the table, there are no limits. You know, that's part of the magic of D&D. You know, unlike a video game, it doesn't have to all be programmed in advance. However, we're still making physical books, meaning we have the hard limit on how many words can we fit on the physical pages between the two covers of your book. So we have to cut a ton. And again, better to do the cutting yourself than have somebody else do it, because they might cut the thing you loved most.
And it's interesting you said get out your knife, because I also took it to mean like, you need to be able to stab someone real quick with your words. Like you need to get it in there, because that you have to hit the nail on the head with maybe a couple words. Sometimes you've only got a few seconds to really get the information in there, because after that you've lost someone's attention or they've moved on to something else in the game. So to me, it's like this real skill in dialogue writing is condensing everything into an emotional, like very small set of words. You've got to do it over and over and over again, and it can be really hard. So then iterate on those words until it really nails it, because then it won't get cut, because everyone's like, oh, I love that line, it's great, you know. So you want to get whittling down into like the little parts that are really, really good.
A great place to finish. I think for now that's all we've got time for. As I said, I'm so glad this was recorded. It was, yeah, such a fantastic session. I'm sure all of you watching will agree. We had so many questions come in then, so clearly this has been something that has struck a chord with people. That's largely because of our fantastic panelists this evening. So a huge thank you to all three of you, Jeremy, Dion, Cara. That was absolutely fantastic. We ran over because we absolutely had to. So thank you for joining us. Thank you, BAFTA, for putting this on. And we'll see you all again soon. Goodbye.